Well, hi everybody. Welcome to Stratosphere Lounge. I'm your host, Bill Little, and this would be episode 164 of the show that dare not speak its own name. How's everybody doing out there? Hope everybody's well. I just put a little more level up there, and we'll get on with it. Why don't we? I was on fire today on Hot Mic Show. Really was a fun show. It's great to be able to trot out some history. We're doing a Antifa show, and it was great to be able to, bring out the all of the brown shirts and all of the Cheka and Red Guards and all the rest of these murdering children. So that was fun. And I don't know. These guys, Antifa doesn't worry me. Tolerance of Antifa worries me, and the way that Antifa is spun worries me. But, bunch of, rich white kids in black masks beating the stuffing out of people and attempted murder and arson and, all the rest of it, felony assault. And I hope they all go to jail. I think that would really just be fun. So I'm looking forward to having somebody, maybe Attorney General or a Justice Department that's ready to enforce the law. Haven't seen much of that lately. I'm sad to say. Anyway, as usual, we didn't look at the questions today, and haven't done that. I haven't looked at them or copied them over, and man, it must be months and months and months. Okay, so why don't we get a look at some of the questions for the show today? And I do, as usual, have a whole ton of things to do as soon as I'm done with this, but it's good to be here, and I hate to miss a show if I really, really don't have to. So let's see. It's a name I don't think I'm that familiar with. First question tonight is from Ted Yantis. Do you feel sometimes that you've bitten off more than you can chew? Since you've joined NRA TV, your right-angle videos have been coming out later and later in the week instead of a steady stream throughout the week for us to contemplate and digest. Are you taking care of yourself, or are you working yourself to death trying to do your regular gig and the Hot Mic Show? It'd be B, Ted. Although I have to say, one of the reasons the shows were late, we had some personnel changes, so we had to get new media person up to steam. And then for 2 weeks or three, I think it's been 3 weeks in a row, we all had a commitment on Monday. It was Labor Day last Monday, when we normally shoot the backstage show. And then I don't know what it was for the previous two shows before that, 2 weeks before that, but instead of shooting those on Monday, getting the backstage show out on Tuesday, then shooting the 4 shows on Tuesday, we shot everything a day late. And what with, getting the media files back and forth and so on, and I still had to do the segment headlines, and I had to do the thumbnails and stuff, and so I'm not trying to wiggle out of it. You're absolutely right. I've just been really, really crazy swamped lately. However, we have a really great editor who's been doing a great job on right angles. We got another great editor doing the after hours and time over targets. So that was an enormous help. But yeah, that Hot Mic Show eats a lot of time. It's I'm on the Grant Show until about 10:15 in the morning, and then I have a little bit of time, maybe half an hour, and I have to start putting together notes for the Hot Mic Show. So we find a topic with the producers, and they try and find a guest. Sometimes I have to provide the guest, and then I'll go in. Today, for example, I spent at least 2 hours. No guest today. So I spent 2 hours pulling, stills of Ernst Röhm and Komsomol and, all the stuff that I needed to make a case. So yeah, it's been tough. The upside is obviously it's nice to have a paying client. And the other thing is too, I feel like I'm doing really good work out there in terms of, daily commentary on the pop culture. So that's been fun. And so I'm sorry I'm late, but we are getting them done. We haven't missed a week yet, not one. And I'm hoping things will start to get a little more back on track starting, this week and next as well. So, we will see. So that's the first one. Let's see who's next. It's our friend Merlin Wonderbo back again. What am I missing? Liberals tell me what a horrible job Trump is doing, what a wonderful President Hillary would have been, and how great socialism would be if we just give it a chance. Before the election, they told me how screwed up I'd be if Trump wins. They say this all smugly, as if they are in on a big secret. They never tell the secret. They never explain step by step how their philosophy is going to achieve paradise, but they are sure of it. What are you missing? Well, you're missing the lobotomy that occupies most of the people who have these theories, Merlin. You're obviously a thinking individual. Anybody with any sense of history and any sense of logic and reason can pretty quickly figure out that that this whole socialism thing doesn't work. I've been threatening to write this afterburner, a firewall forever, and I was going to do it tonight, but I just got backed up. I'll try and get it done tomorrow. But yeah, I'm going to explain socialism in terms of a little kid who comes to school and shares cookies, and once she starts sharing cookies, she's expected to share cookies with everybody, and the more she does, the more she has to share, and so on. It's very simple, very short. But as I've said a few times on this show, the punchline is the reason socialism doesn't work is because everybody loves to eat cookies, but not everybody likes to make cookies. It's pretty much that simple, honestly. And the reason they never get over it is because it's fantasy. Merlin, it's kind of a sort of a low grade form of, like people who have like this Bigfoot obsession or UFO obsession, or moon landing was a conspiracy obsession. It's not like the evidence isn't there. It's just that there's such an emotional need to believe in what they believe in, and there's so much. I think really it just comes down to so much guilt on the part of these progressives, because most of the ones with the mouthpiece anyway are multimillionaires, and they're talking about how we need to take everybody's tax money, but they don't want to give up their own money, so they basically do this shuffle where they talk about how wonderful it would be and so on. Now, needless to say, the only people who really think socialism is a swell idea are some people who have never lived under socialism. And the whole thing that you mentioned there before is they never tell the secret of how to do it right. And the reason they don't tell the secret of how to do it right is because it can't do it right. You bring up the Nazis and they'll say they weren't really socialists. Well, National Socialist German Workers' Party, I didn't name it, they did. Yeah, well, they weren't socialists. Well, then they used the word socialism to sucker foolish people into believing that they were going to be doing something nice. How about that explanation? And the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, another 30, 40 million killed. Nobody knows the number. The People's Republic of China, another communist experiment. Nobody knows the number. 50 million at least, I would say. And as I've said 100 times, the same is true in Cambodia, Vietnam, Nicaragua, and now Venezuela. In Venezuela, if you're an animal lover and a socialist, you're going to have to make up your mind which one of these two is more important to you, because your socialism is having people eat cats and dogs in Venezuela, because the oil-richest country in the Western Hemisphere is so broke that they're eating animals out of the zoo, and they're catching cats and dogs in the neighborhood and cooking them, because your socialism is there. And they say, well, that's not doing it right either. Well, for a system that's been tried on and off for 100 years this year, and not ever been done right, you might start thinking that maybe this isn't such a good idea. And as I've said also before, they point to Sweden or Finland or something, and you can basically say, well, Sweden and Finland have very small, highly educated, hardworking populations. They don't have to pay for defense because we pay for their defense. They don't invent anything. There's nothing in the world that you touch today that comes from Finland. Nothing. There's no internet, no computers, no apps, no programming, no nothing. Nothing. It's a giant nursing home is what it is. And, and I suppose it's some people want to live that way, but when you talk about the standard of living for Sweden or Finland or Denmark, you really need to compare it to what the standard of living for Sweden or Finland or Denmark would be if they were not so socialist. And finally, needless to say, For those socialist holdouts who finally retreat to the Scandinavian countries because there's nowhere else left to go, history is just littered with bodies of people from Bernie's political and economic school of thought. So once you get to walk away from the 200 million killed, and you end up in Scandinavia as your example of how it can be done right. But number one, as they say, they don't have to pay for their defense because American capitalists pay for that. And two, it's not working in Sweden or Denmark or Finland either. Socialism is a Ponzi scheme. It's a system where 4 people can work harder than they would need to in order to support an extra person. 4 people can support 1 person, but 1 person can't support 4. And socialism only works in the same way that a Ponzi scheme works. A pyramid scheme, same thing. As long as there are new suckers coming in on the bottom and sending their dollars up to the suckers above them, and they send them up to the suckers above them, and so on, as long as there's a whole new strata of suckers coming in at the bottom, then you can continue to make this thing work after a fashion. Putting aside all the things it does to the life force and the birth rate and libido and invention and freedom and all the rest, put all that aside. You can make it work as a nursing home, and things are very, very nice there and very clean. But one of the functions of a socialist society, it seems, or rather one of the side effects, I suppose I should say, is that turns out that cradle-to-grave care by the state pretty much kills any desire you would have to have children. And why would you have children? They're inconvenient. You've got your whole life is planned out and paid for and all the rest of it. So the birth rate in Sweden is, I don't know what it is, 1.2, 1.3, something like that. And you need a birth rate of slightly more than 2 in order to hold just basically tread water. And more than 2 children per couple is a growth population, and less than 2 children per couple is a shrinking population. And Sweden and Denmark and Norway and Finland are shrinking and have been shrinking for pretty much 40 or 50 years. So in order to keep the benefits up, they got to keep bringing in new people at the bottom of the pyramid. And they're not making any new people, so they have to import new people. And they're importing them from West Africa, the Middle East, and places like that don't share the Swedish or Scandinavian peace-loving, cooperative, kind, decent ethics. On the contrary, they look at that as weakness. They see a bunch of weaklings who are not even willing to defend themselves or their own culture with everything, and they're determined to take it. And there you go. So anybody who wants to argue for socialism, there's no place to go. There's no place in the last 100 years where it's worked. And even the places that seem like it is nice are temporary, just sort of temporary gaps where they're basically paying for today from the future. And that's it. In the words of our progressive friends, it's not sustainable. So I don't know why. I almost said I don't know why people believe in it, but I do know why they believe in it. They believe in it because they feel guilty about all the things they have. And they see other people in the world that don't have anything. And so instead of getting to the root, instead of getting down to the basics of why some people have things and why some people don't have things, they just think it's a lot easier for them to, spew about how much they want socialism and equality and income equality, and they want to do all these things, but they don't have to do them. So it's a nice thing about unearned moral superiority. It's pretty cheap. It doesn't cost you anything. You just get to be a better person by just flapping your jaws and telling people, I think this is awesome. And the hardest part of all is explaining to people who come from actual socialism why this is happening in this country. And their reaction is, don't these people know what they're doing? I say, no, they don't. And then you realize it's really our fault, We've just allowed it to go on. This whole thing started, as far as I'm concerned, back in the mid-'60s when these left-wing students took over the Yale Law Library, and the school backed them instead of having them arrested. The school said, no, we're very sensitive to their demands. And since then, it's been downhill all the way for that half of the population that is afflicted by this terrible disease. And I don't know what to tell you about that. I wish I did. I could tell you what would cure them, though, What would cure them would be living in a socialist country for a month. Um, that would pretty much do it. Even the multimillionaire celebrities would probably be cured if they actually had to go and live in a place where you're going to go to the zoo at night not to see the animals but to catch them and eat them, because your socialism experiment has turned you into the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere because of the socialism. You're sitting on just gigantic pools of oil. How hard is it? It wasn't hard before, but that dream never dies. And it's such a deep conviction. Once again, I've been reading, I just keep going back and forth. I'm constantly looking at the foundations of these tyrannies, and I'm rereading the Gulag Archipelago. Solzhenitsyn's talking about all the different trials and all the different cases and so on, and over the course of, 30 or 40 years of murder. And the one thing that's so striking is how often people go to their own unjustified death. They're taken out and executed having committed no crimes at all. And even then, on the walk out to the post, they're still talking about the glories of communism, and even though this is a terrible mistake, the workers' paradise must continue. I don't know what it is. I think it's a philosophy for people who are lazy and stupid, and I don't see a tremendous work ethic in this millennial generation as a general rule, again with notable exceptions. So since they're bored and since they've always been given everything, why wouldn't they want to back a social program that they've been told will give them everything free that they want for the rest of their lives? Of course they believe in it. And no one's been able to stop and present the other side of the story. We're trying, but as we did a right angle on this, and somebody mentioned it in the comments a little while ago. They're blocking the shows on Facebook now. They're blocking them on YouTube, not completely, but they're making sure that they don't get spread, and they're suppressing the numbers significantly. Glenn Beck and the Blaze had to lay off 20% of his workforce. It's possible that he tried to grow too fast, but look, we have this problem, and we talk about it on one form or another every week, right? Internet is free, television is free. Paying for television on the internet, people expect it to be free, and it's not free. And it doesn't matter how many times I say it. Apparently, there's just a percentage of the population that understands this and is willing to pay for it, and the rest of the population just says, "Oh, I'll take the free ice cream," and then if the free ice cream goes away, then I guess I don't get any ice cream. And I don't know how to explain that either. I do know that the world is changing, and that all of the old mechanisms for paying for things, usually in the cultural sphere, comes down to advertising revenues. That world is going fast and going very, very fast. You used to pay for your television in ways you didn't know. You used to pay for it by going out and buying Tide or Budweiser or something like that. That's how you paid for your TV. And the other way you paid for your TV was to sit and watch 7 minutes of commercials in a 30-minute time slot. And I cannot bear that anymore. But that's what we're used to. It's what older people are used to. And it takes a while for people to understand that those days are over. And now a word from our sponsor. Talk Radio gets it. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I don't know how talk radio stays in business. I couldn't bear to listen to AM talk radio. I've never listened to it. And the reason I can't listen to it is, in that case, it's 7 minutes of commercials for 4 minutes of content or whatever it is. I've hosted Rusty Humphrey shows, I think, 5 times, so I know what the breakdown is. But I can't bear it. I just can't stand it to listen to that many commercials and to keep breaking up things I like. You ever watch a movie on like the network TV version of, just pick one, Wrath of Khan, let's say, and these days have been gone for 10 years, but you remember the television premiere of Wrath of Khan on NBC, Thursday, whatever. And so they run the Wrath of Khan, and for the first half hour, they don't do any commercials. And then in the second half hour, they do 3. And in the third half hour, they do 11. And in the fourth half hour, they do 26. And and it's just like, just constantly breaking it up. So that's a price that we paid that we don't pay for here on the internet. And I'm going to do a fundraising, a membership drive next month. I'm going to call it Locktober, because we are being locked out of Facebook and YouTube and all the rest because it's working, because it's successful, because when you spread out somebody did a number, I think 30, 40, 50 million views or something, that has an effect. And it not only has affected the people that watch the videos, it affects the people that talk to the people that watch the videos. And needless to say, I'm nothing like the biggest fish in this pond, and Rush and Beck and Daily Wire and conservative CRTV, all those guys. Everybody's struggling to get people to understand that this is something that costs money, and if we lose this, then we lose the country. I'm sorry to say it. I don't mean to. I make a major point to not, blow my own horn if I can possibly help it. But the truth is, it's a battle of ideas, and they have owned the narrative for 50, 60 years. And starting about 12 years ago with blogs, we started fighting back, and started getting some traction. But they understand. The left understands that this costs money. That's why Soros puts hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars every year into these programs. And that's why Hollywood filmmakers are willing to make a movie that criticizes George Bush, knowing full well that it's not going to make any money, but they don't care because they know that if they can get their programs through, then they get all the money. And they do. They take about half of what we make when you get right down to it, in terms of income taxes and sales taxes, state taxes, property taxes, all of it. They take about half of what we make, and we let them. And every year they take more, and they deliver less. And they do it because they own the mythology, and they own the information. And when you try to fight that, it costs money, and they're ready to pay. The left is ready to pay. They pay up, and the right just generally doesn't. And that's heartbreaking. It's been heartbreaking since I've been in this business. It's been heartbreaking and very tough to understand. And some of the people who've been larger scale sponsors of the work, not just the wonderful members we have, but some people every now and then put a bigger chunk of money. They told me to my face several times that all of their friends, all of their other rich friends, wealthy friends, are constantly talking about how the country's going down the tubes and we need to do something about it. And then he says, okay, well, here's what we're going to do about it. And then they just say, I don't really feel like writing a check right now. So that's that. It's one reason why the NRA show is something really important for us. I don't like the fact that it takes as much time as I do, and I understand on some level it's hurting some of the rest of the work, but at least the people who pay money to the National Rifle Association know that their money is important. And because of that, the NRA has the kind of pockets that can keep little studios like this one afloat for a while anyway. So that's basically the story of how we got here, and how we're going to continue to go. But we're not giving up, and I guess you're not either. All right, so let's see. Moving on here. Look, I'm just going right down the order. The numbers are strange in terms of the likes, but this is the order that Facebook has decided to put them in. Steve Darrow says, in your Texas turning purple right angle, you all spoke of California coming to Texans and voting for the same bad policies that messed up California so badly that those same Californians wanted to leave in the first place. Since the vast majority of people don't connect policies with outcomes, good or bad, they don't see the problem with bringing the bad policies with them when they flee the bad outcomes. How do we help people make this connection? Well, that's the trick, isn't it? I think the answer, frankly, is just to basically just tell them. I mean, just tell them, like we just did earlier with the socialism thing. You got to just tell them. The people who consider themselves socialists have never heard the 10 minutes that I did on socialism at the beginning of the show. It's never, ever, ever, ever crossed their minds. And once you tell people these things, they start thinking about it. This is why the left has to control everything and shut down any voices of dissent, because their policies don't make sense, Steve. And people know it. But it's that it's not peer pressure, social proof. It's a social proof that, everybody else believes it. I suppose I should believe it too. However, once you point out to them that this doesn't work and here's why, they're stuck and they have to think about it. And then they start to change their mind. And, I don't know why they make the connection. If I was a Texan, I would be just livid. And if I ever move someplace where I'd like to live, I'm going to decompress as if I'm coming up from a deep depth. If I ever decide to move to northern Idaho, for example, I'm not just going to move to Idaho with my California tags and bear the completely justified hostile stares. I'll move to Nevada. I'll do 6 months in Nevada, and I'll get the Nevada tags, and then I'll go to come up a little bit higher, and I'll go to Utah for another 6 months, and then I'll move into Idaho from Utah. I'll just decompress kind of over the course of a year or two and kind of bleed the California out of people. But California used to be the state that invented everything, and it was the golden state and the richest state, and Reagan was from California, and Reagan was running what was actually free college. Reagan was running what was actually genuinely free college because he was running the state with an efficiency that was generating a surplus. He was running the state as if it was a business. And when you've got an actual surplus, you could argue that the taxes need to go lower, but as long as that tax rate is not too extreme and the economy grows and is humming, then you can take money from people through taxation and give people genuinely free educations instead of the education that they're getting now for free, which is borrowing it from the future, which is either never going to be paid back, and that's going to be a whole can of worms, or it's going to burden them for the next century, them and their children and their children's children, to pay for the stuff that we're spending now. So, I don't know. These places are, I try to explain this to Natasha, how come they take half of what we make here and they don't provide anything. The roads are crap. We don't get, free college or free health care, any of these other things that people call free because they're taken out of your paycheck. In Russia, you pay 25% tax or something, and of course it all goes to corrupt officials, but they're the kind of corrupt officials that stay bought. So when you pay your taxes, they take their cut and wet their beaks, but things get done. And when I say get done, I mean they leave you alone till the time they come by and hit you up again. So it's a little tough for me to face the fact that the Russians are taxed at about half of what Americans are taxed at, and they get all the benefits of a high rate of taxation, and we don't. How do I explain that? We're paying half, and we don't forget free schools or free medical care, prepaid, I should say. We don't even get decent roads. The roads in Los Angeles are third world roads, and the place is filthy. And she reminds me of this frequently, and it's embarrassing, and it's disgraceful. If you leave Los Angeles and drive into Orange County, all of a sudden the broken up pavement just goes and it's spotless and it's well manicured and it's well taken care of, and that's because LA County is run by Democrats and Orange County is run by Republicans. So it's not hard to explain. It's just disgraceful and shameful. It's easy to explain. It's easy to explain because it's a gigantic extortion racket. It's a complete extortion racket, and the worst people in the country go into government and become, these pimps. I saw a picture of Maxine Waters, and below that it said poverty pimp. And I thought that's a pretty good term. If you look at some of her the neighborhoods that she represents, it looks like Nicaragua or El Salvador or Zaire. It just doesn't look like it's America. They're in horrible shape. And so so the whole thing ties together, right? So why do people keep voting for people like Maxine Waters and the rest of these Democrats when obviously these Democratic-controlled cities are just pits of murder and poverty? And the answer is, since they control the media, and since the conservatives out there are not willing to pay the way that the liberals are willing to pay for their, the liberals are willing to pay to destroy the country, but we're not willing to pay to save it. So they own the media, they own the information, they own the pop culture, and they convince the people who live in these hellholes that, yes, everything here is terrible, but it'd be much worse if those Republicans got a hold of it. And around and around and around it goes. And guys like me just keep, punching at this wall, is I don't feel like I have, I'm not allowed to give up. I wouldn't give up. I'm not allowed to leave. I'm chained to this thing, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I'm chained by my own ethical commitment to trying to preserve what's left of this country's freedoms, and I hate injustice, and I hate murder, and I'm motivated to do what I can to stop it. And the people that are doing the murdering are calling themselves angels, and the people they're calling devils are the best people in the world, and I just don't like that, so I keep doing what I'm doing as long as I can. Hey, it's that miscreant Matthew Lloyd. Matt says, hey, it seems like much of your recent content targets primarily conservative audiences. We know you have a passion for messaging and reaching the culture outside conservatism. Can you share more details on your ideas to do more of that in the future? It's a kind way to tee up the whole video game thing, but after 2-3 months of talking about it, we still haven't gone back to the people who wrote in letters. It's taken a long time. But we've got, I had to put together costumes. I spent a full month and a half, 6 weeks, 7 weeks trying to figure out how to get these game assets back into the render engine that created them, and that doesn't seem likely. So by the end of September, I will have finished a demo, and the demo will be a complete film. It'll be a 3 or 4 minute film. It'll be start to finish, and it will have one political message in it, one, and you won't know it. It certainly won't know it if you're not a fan of mine. If you are a fan of mine, then you'll probably be able to pick it up. But it's basically going to be kind of an adventure story, and with real characters, and it's just going to be cast of 2, a couple of others, but basically it's going to be me and Alfonso Rachel, and we're going to be acting, and he's a great actor, and we're going to be using all of the tools that I had prior to doing this. Right now, my tool set consists of me standing in front of a green screen or in front of a background and behind a podium and talking to people in first person. And it's me and my voice and whatever lunacy pops into my head, and that's it. Using, forget the technology, forget the games, forget the whole computer game thing, forget all of that, put that aside for a minute. Just the fact that I can tell fictional stories gives me enormously more tools to work with. I can use music, for example. I can use lighting. I can use pauses. I can have adversaries, and I can have antagonists. I can have protagonists. I can have protagonists making mistakes. I can do things with an expression that I could never do with an explanation, and everybody who knows anything about this line of work understands that it's one thing to tell people something. If you tell them something, it's processed with their cerebral cortex. If you tell them something, it's an intellectual delivery that they have to decode intellectually and then internalize emotionally. However, if you show them something, it goes straight past that. It goes right straight past the cortex, goes right into the brainstem, and it goes right to the limbic system. It goes right to your emotions, and if it's really well done, it could go right down to your reptile brain, and you don't have to think about it. And that is how they got this country into this kind of trouble, and that's how we're going to get it back. So the ability to write scripts and have those tools of pacing and action, just having cool stuff happen, is enormously powerful. It gets people who would never, ever sit still for a 6-minute firewall or even a 4-minute firewall. They would never, ever sit still for that. But if you're doing things that they like to do and it's interesting and it keeps moving, you can probably pin them down for a 4-minute segment, and that's the plan. I plan to do one to show people the proof of concept, and then if I can get some funding for it, I will, and if not, I'll keep doing it anyway. And it would be basically a series of little 4 or 5 minute videos with a sequential timeline with a gigantic big character arc. And the character arc is basically somebody comes to this guy because a couple of rich people come to this guy because they want to build America in space, and they need somebody who knows how to do that. And I'm basing the character I'm playing on John Boyd, who is a genius and who was mocked for all of the things he thought of. I'm not comparing myself to the genius part. I'm just saying he's the most really important guy who had such breakthrough ideas, and nobody knows about him. So give me a chance to do that. And while I'm talking about these things, I get a chance to talk to young people, primarily young men, because a flight instructor is very much a father figure. And while you're showing all this groovy, fantastic graphics and stuff and teaching people how to fly, which also interests the people who are watching, then you can get them on other things too. You can start to talk to them about things like honor and commitment and integrity and all of these things, courage, all of these. And you can tell them without telling them. You just show them. You show people doing things. Look, I would never have been in this business if I could make feature films, because I'd be making feature films be far more effective than the work I do now. And I still plan to do that. But the nice thing about these video games is they're precisely halfway between where I am and where I want to be. And 6 months ago, I was telling Natasha, this is where I want to be, and this is where I am, and I cannot get there from here. I can't get there from here. There's just no way. I can't do more work, and the work required to do a feature film is just shocking. I can't do more of it. I'm just running the hamster wheel to the melting point just to keep, treading water, holding position. And then all of a sudden along comes this thing which interests me because it's science fiction, and I think it's cool, and I understand the world. I'm a pilot, and I understand elements of this that the gamers don't understand. And we have people like Vipercheck and Matt and a few others we're going to be bringing in who do these kind of things in real life. And the benefit of that is it sounds real. It's got the feel of realism. It's got the ring of truth. And we'll see. But it is interesting to me that these things find themselves exactly halfway between the political work I'm doing and the storytelling I want to do. So we'll see. I'm certainly not going to put my name on it. I will post them on billwhittle.com, but it's going to be its own YouTube channel, and it's going to be its own website, and my name's not going to appear anywhere on that. It's going to be essentially a role-played website, as if it were real. And that gives me a lot of power too. I'm not going to pretend that people won't figure out who I am, and I'm sure the left will start complaining to the makers of this game, and I'm preparing myself for that too. But it's not about me, and it's certainly not about me as a political commentator. I'm doing it because I know how to do it, and I kind of want to. It's fun. I've been working on costumes and stuff for this, and I've forgotten how much fun it is to get dressed up in costumes and walk around and do cool special effects and making interesting graphics and logos and all the rest of it. It's just fun for me. And the stories just tell themselves. And look, folks, I mean, just some part of it is I've been doing this long format stuff for 12 years now. I think, more than that. 14? Is that right? 2002? Yeah, 15 years, 14, 15 years. And I've done hundreds and hundreds of firewalls and afterburners, which is unbelievable. I've done 5,000 right angles. And it's not that I can't keep doing them. I can and I will keep doing them. I'm going to keep doing them, which is not what I was thinking about a year ago, but I will continue to keep doing them. But I'm a little bored with it, you know? I mean, I don't get any creative kick out of it. There are things that I feel like I have to say, and I say them, and I'm very proud of them when they come out, and I'm proud of the work on them, and I'm proud of how they look. But it's not something that I get much excited about anymore, and I suppose it's understandable. If you've been doing the same thing for 15 years, you would want to change too, especially if you're kind of an artist. You can't just stay where you are. You got to get bigger, or you start to die. And I don't want to be as limited as I am when I do first person singular present tense lectures. I told Natasha many times too, because it was really looking like I was just not going to get there. It just wasn't going to happen. And it still may not, needless to say, but I was telling her, and she told me the same thing everybody else tells me when I talk about trying to make a move into movies. And again, this is just what people tell me. Is, Bill, you're so good at this. You're just really, really good at this. And I say, well, thank you. I believe that's true, but it's not what I want to do. Yeah, but it's really important. The work you're doing is important, and you're really, really needs to be done. And that's when I start thinking that the people that like the work that I do already, that'd be you guys. I just come out and say it. You have no idea what I am capable of doing if I had the resources to do it. I think I would amaze people. I know it's a very arrogant thing to say, and it's not coming from an arrogant place. I just think that people would be surprised at what I feel like I'm capable of doing if I had the entire toolbox at my fingertips. And I'm going to give it a try. So we'll see. I may be wrong. No, who am I kidding? That's inconceivable. But one way or another, we're going to get one done, and then at the very least we can look at it, because there's no way to raise money for this without showing it to people. There's no way I can go to Republican donors and explain this. I've been trying to explain it to you guys for 2.5, 3 months now, something like that. Most people still don't understand it or like it, and that's okay. I understand that. So we're going to do one of them, and I suspect that we're going to do more than one of them, one way or another. So there you go. Eric Blake has a question. He writes, wow, it's a long one. Hey, Bill. Hey, Eric. Yesterday on Hot Mike, you and Michael Knowles brought up superhero films. I personally think you two might not be giving those films enough credit. Consider, first of all, I think a major reason such films are apparently propping up Hollywood right now, is that it's the one genre conservative audiences can enjoy without fearing that the movie might insult our values and principles. In fact, oftentimes our principles are actually promoted and affirmed. See the Dark Knight trilogy, taking on terrorism and the occupiers, Man of Steel, restoring Superman's devotion to the American way, Captain America waxing eloquent on the value of liberty, and so on. Second, with superhero films becoming a genre now, I've actually seen a wide variety of stories. It isn't the same story over and over, far from it. Ant-Man is an Ocean's 11 style heist film. Captain America, Winter Soldier is a 70s style political thriller, and so on. So my question is, with a new genre consistently treating conservatism with respect and coincidentally propping up the otherwise struggling Hollywood, is this possibly the Tinseltown establishment effectively admitting they can't exist without conservatism fueling both society and story? Well, it's a long question, but a really good one. Let me take the second part of it first. There's an interesting phenomenon, a fascinating phenomenon, and I've had a chance to talk with Jeremy Boring about this and a few other people. And let's just call it the Firefly effect. So here was this TV show Firefly and a movie Serenity. It's basically cowboys in space. Pretty much simple. It's cowboys in space. And the lead character, Mal Reynolds, is... I think it's Reynolds. Mal, the captain, is as conservative a character as you're ever going to find. And he has, I'm going to butcher this line for actual fans, but basically, somebody says, you know, you're going to kill me, and he says, so, you know, look, if I'm going to kill you, it's going to be looking at you eye to eye, and you're going to be armed. That's a profoundly conservative thing to say. I aim to misbehave. The whole theme of the movie Serenity was that the social engineers tried to breed violence out of people, and they ended up making this mutant race of reavers that are just nothing but violence personified. And around and around and around it goes. And it's consistently conservative. And that's written by Joss Whedon. And Joss Whedon comes out and does one of the most left-wing political messages of the last election cycle. He's a gigantic, enormous liberal, huge progressive. And how do you square that? And Jeremy and I, discussing it, came to the conclusion that my suggestion was, when you sit down to write a story, your core comes out. I mean, if you're any good, when you write something worthwhile, you'll look at it and you'll read it. And even though you just wrote it, you'll read it for the first time. You're not really creating it so much as you're just channeling it, which means it's coming from someplace very deep. It's coming from very, very deep emotional place and psychological place and so on. So my contention is that Joss Whedon is a gigantic conservative. He writes like a conservative. His heroes are conservative. His plot lines are conservative. He has conservative dialogue. I don't think you can fake that. I think the fake part of Joss Whedon is the liberal part. I think he's a gigantic progressive because everybody around him is as well. And he would like to continue to work in this town, and he'd like to not lose all his friends. And so I'm not saying that Joss Whedon is a closet conservative who's just pretending to be a liberal. He's an enormous progressive left-winger. But I think the reason he is because he understands on some level the cognitive dissonance between what he says he believes and what he writes. And I believe the stuff that he writes is the real him. And so I suspect that what he does psychologically is he buys into the whole conservatives are racist and Nazis kind of thing, and it gives him a place to park. But in any event, he is a great example of this, and he's just a personal example. Again and again and again, if you look at Hollywood, what you find is people like Matt Damon and Jamie Foxx talking about gun control while in the theaters, their characters are blowing people away. Here's David Wellman. He says, if I ever kill you, you'll be awake, you'll be facing me, and you'll be armed. That's profoundly great line. He's a great writer. So you get Jamie Foxx and Matt Damon talking about gun control while they're up on screen blowing people away in a way that actual conservatives with real guns would never do. And the sort of the pornographic violence and things like The Matrix, the shootout scene in the first Matrix in the bank lobby is it absolutely astonishingly great piece of film. It's one of those 5 minutes of film that you can count on one hand as just saying that this is what the art form is about. The shootout scene in the bank lobby on The Matrix is like the helicopter attack in Apocalypse Now. It's like the docking sequence in 2001. It's like it's one of those things that's just like it's just so perfectly done. But if you look at the Matrix movie, it's porn. It's pornography. It's violent pornography. It's just people killing people who are policemen, by the way, and security guards. And people in long black trench coats with black glasses are killing people left and right, but they're not real people. They just go down. And the music and the editing and the score and the effects is just absolutely brilliant. And the Wachowski brothers, or brother and sister, or whatever they are now, undoubtedly far, far left-wing, enormously left-wing people. But they're making a video about gun violence that the people who actually own guns would never, ever imagine, just beyond their imagining. So it's weird. They're stuck. I don't know if Carroll O'Connor was a gigantic liberal. I suspect he was. Without question, Norman Lear was. Archie Bunker, is kind of the, I guess that's why they called him Archie. He's the arch conservative. He's the foil. He's the stupid one. He's the biased one, the bigoted one. He's the racist one, all of that. But he's also the honest one. He's the one who's got an actual heart. And despite Norman Lear's best efforts and everybody else's best efforts, Norman Lear wanted people to love Mike Stivic, and they didn't. They loved Archie Bunker. And the reason they loved Archie Bunker is because Mike Stivic is parasitical on Archie Bunker. Mike Stivic insults Archie all the time while he lives under his roof and eats his food. And on some level, you can't escape that. So this is kind of a consistent theme of left-wingers left-wingers ending up writing extremely right-wing stuff because it's just better morality. It's a better story. You don't write a story about a group of people. There are no stories about collectives. You don't have a collective hero. And as I've said, even if you take something that is about a collective teamwork, like a football movie, let's say, Rudy is not about the entire Notre Dame team. Rudy's about one guy and Friday Night Lights and the rest of it. It's not about every single player on the team. There's 3 or 4 people that stand out. This is why the essence of storytelling is conservative. It's individuals arrayed against great power with very high stakes, doing heroic things on their own. James Bond does not confront the villain with a strongly worded letter from the United Nations. He's got a Walther PPK. Doesn't drive off in a reasonable speed in a Prius. He's got a Jaguar. And it doesn't matter how liberal you are politically as a writer, you cannot write liberal stuff because there's no story there. And there's no ethics there. And I'm not joking about that. I use that term a lot, that little phrase a lot, because I like it. But it's true. I mean, it's actually true. Think about going to see a movie where going to see a movie about a group of activists, and their plan for stopping world evil is to write a harshly worded letter and drive off in a reasonable speed at a Prius. There's no story there. Nobody wants to watch that. Nobody wants to watch that. And they don't want to watch it because it's not watchable, because it's nothing interesting there. There's nothing noble, nothing great. It's just the same kind of, soggy kind of oatmeal that Sweden is. It's just pablum. It's something you just gum. You don't even need any teeth for it. So it's the great tragedy of our times. Now back to the comic book aspect of that. On the show, I said I think comic books are losing steam. I think there's no question about that. They're still doing very big box office, and strangely enough, just before the show, I was looking at a bunch of trailers for Avengers Infinity War and Thor Ragnarok and all of this other stuff. And they're all strong. And then that's just the Marvel stuff, the DC stuff, Justice League and Wonder Woman, and Wonder Woman had good box office and so on. I didn't mean to suggest that they are about to tank, but they are certainly past peak popularity and peak wonder. I mean, the first time I saw Iron Man, which really started it was almost, 10 years ago, more. First time I saw Iron Man, I went, whoa. And I loved the first Spider-Man series with, what's his name? The guy, it'll come to me in a second. But they were great. And now there are so many of them. There's been, 3 Iron Mans, 3 Thors, I want to say, 2 or 3 Captain Americas, a couple of Avengers, third one on the way. There's been Doctor Strange, and now they're putting them all together, and everybody's going, wow, Doctor Strange in the same movie as Spider-Man and Guardians of the Galaxy. Yeah, that's true, and it's cool to see these people bundled together, but, I mean, how many times can you do it? They will continue to make money, but they're not fresh, is the point I was trying to make, and perhaps I didn't make clearly enough. There's nothing fresh about them anymore. There are great stories, perhaps, or interesting twists on storylines, and they hold your interest, or maybe they've got a point to make or so on, but they're not fresh. And I have to tell you, I saw Man of Steel, which was and I think he's the best Superman I've ever seen. Well, maybe Chris Reeve was better because he was much more friendly and accessible, but this Superman is fantastic. And I watched Man of Steel. It's an American god. See ya. Uh, and um, and I watched the end of that movie, and the final 90 minutes of Man of Steel are two computer-generated immortal supermen bashing themselves with ever bigger things. And I have to tell you, the final hour of that movie, I don't think I've been that bored. Tobey Maguire thinks. I can't remember being that bored. What's going to happen? Oh, okay, so Zod's going to punch him through a museum, and then Superman's going to pick up a train and bat him on the head with a railway car, and then Zod's going to knock him through the Hoover Dam, and then Superman's going to pick up a tanker, an ocean liner or something, and bash him over the head with that. And neither one of them are going to have any effect. All they're going to do is just show more buildings coming down and glass flying and all the rest. It was incredibly dull to me, and that wasn't the case 10 years ago. They were fresh. They were like, wow. They're not that anymore. And I can't track it anymore. I don't go to all of them. I've gone to some of them. And so I can't track all the storylines now. And I don't know how many movies are coming out. I know Avengers 3 is coming out. Iron Man 4 is coming out. There might be another Doctor Strange. Guardians of the Galaxy 2 just came out. There'll probably be a 3. But it's not fresh. There's nothing new. And Iron Man 3 was direct, Troy Stevens says. It was absolutely terrible. Absolutely terrible. And again, that movie was terrible because what were the villains? Well, we've already fought bad guys and beat them in Iron Man 1. Then we fought against another kind of an Iron Man in Iron Man 2. So let's have thousands of Iron Men that we can go and destroy. And it's, it's just dull. And this kind of action, that kind of so-called action sequences are boring in the way that Lucas made the prequels boring. If there is anything that I am less afraid of in the fictional world, it's a battle droid. They are designed to look funny. These battle droids are designed to look like they look like Jar Jar. They're designed to be comic foils. And how many times do I have to see invincible Jedi reflecting blaster bolts off of battle droids and having them burst into sparks? I mean, how many times do you have to see it? Where is the drama there? What's the thrill? Where's the emotional connection? There's none. And ultimately, in the prequels, Lucas got to the place where all these things are ending up, which is you have a gigantic spectacle of computer-generated clones fighting computer-generated robots. And who do you root for? Nobody. You hope they all die. I got clones on one hand, I got robots on the other. I hope they all die. I don't like any of them. So there you go. And then all along, comes the Abrams reboot of Force Awakens. And now we've got real people, and the scale is much smaller. Same for Rogue One. It's a much tighter universe. We're not going and listening to people preaching about politics and trade agreements and stuff. We got a guy in the desert, and he's trying to find water, and you got a woman with a stick, and she's trying to save her life and find her family, and all the rest of it. It's great. And the best example of this is in terms of getting away from the staleness of spectacle. That's what I'll call it. It's just the staleness of spectacle. I've seen it. Yes, it's cool. I admit I had not seen the Empire State Building used as a hypodermic needle in somebody's arm before. Yes, that's really amazing, but I have no emotional connection to this. And the great example of this, I think, was the James Bond series, because the first Bonds were very, very, very engaging because they were very, very, very believable. Dr. No is just a simple spy story. Goldfinger has got a really clever plot. We're not going to steal all the gold in the world. We're just going to make half of it radioactive, and the half that I own is going to be worth so much more. But it's manageable. It's a world. It's Sean Connery versus Oddjob. It's something. And then they had to keep topping themselves, right? So they had to keep topping themselves. So next thing you know, you got Thunderball. Okay, now we've got Armies of Underwater Frogmen. Okay, fine. That's not fine. I'm still with it. Good. And then you get into things like Moonraker and not even that. Diamonds Are Forever. Now we have the underground caves. You only live twice. Now we have the secret base inside a volcano, and it's no longer about a guy with a gun. It's now about a guy who's going to use a gigantic diamond and reflect it off the moon in order to destroy Washington, and all of this nonsense. And it got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And then when it's like a singer who starts here and then who hits a higher note. And by the time they got finished with the Brosnan movies, they realized that there is no note higher than this. We can't do anything higher than this, than Pierce Brosnan on a parrot wing surfing a tsunami around icebergs. They couldn't make it any bigger than that. It was done. It was over. And the genius of it was when they went to Daniel Craig in Casino Royale, they went right back to the beginnings. It was now, all of a sudden, it goes from being orbiting space stations and guys in yellow jumpsuits and lasers and all of this stuff. Now it's a guy with a gun trying to get another guy with a gun in a small confined space, and all of a sudden you're connected again. You're back there. You're with it. So, I'm not saying that the comic book movies are done, but I'm saying they're past their peak. There's nothing interesting or new there for me. I mean, I know who Spider-Man is, and I know who Iron Man is, and I know who Thor is, and yeah, it's really cool to see them all on the same screen. And by the way, just parenthetically, this Infinity War, the bad guy in this, I don't know his name, I'm not much of a comic book fan, but he's this giant purple villain, the super villain. And he is the phoniest looking CG I've seen in a long time. He looks like a Sunday morning cartoon show, CG. Snape. On the other hand, from the new Star Wars movies, he looked convincing and unpleasant. So there you go. I don't know whether Hollywood is aware of the fact that conservatives can watch these movies without puking. The great irony here is they stopped making movies for the American people because the politics diverted so much from the American people. And they got away with it because of money from Saudi Arabia and from China and so on. And so they didn't have to tell movie stories that the American people liked anymore. And they thought they'd make it up on the international box office. But the problem is that the reason that there's an international box office for American films and not one for Guatemalan films is because the American experience, the America of the movies, is interesting and desirable to everybody on the earth. Truth, justice, and the American way makes sense to people everywhere. And that's why people from all around the world wanted to see American movies and wanted to come to America and be Americans. That's why. Because truth, justice, and the American way makes sense. Truth, justice, and all that stuff, which was the line they gave, what's his name in that previous Superman, Superman Returns, I guess it was. Truth, justice, all that stuff. Now it's a cynical take on it, right? Now it's a mocking it. It's winking at the audience as you say the lines. And Americans don't like it, and guess what? Foreigners don't like it either. They understand that Superman is not about cynicism. It's not about irony or cynicism or anti-heroes. It's about belief in something good. It's what the original Star Trek was before they started lecturing us. And by the way, this Star Trek Discovery, I have not seen any of it except for the trailers, and it looks simply appalling because they've done exactly what everything else in the society has done. They've gone from giving us something that was about adventure and about discovery, and they've turned it into a social engineering laboratory. And I blame Next Generation. I'm sorry. The fight, the struggle continues. Original series, Next Generation. But the idea that one of the people on the bridge is going to be the resident psychologist mystic who senses a great deal of hostility on the Romulan ship that's firing at us, it's stupid. And the whole holodeck was just, we're out of ideas, so let's tell a gangster movie. Why don't you do what real men do, which is go to a gangster planet like they did in the original? Anyway, you get that. So in any event, that's a comic book answer. I think we'll do maybe one or two more tops, and I've got to get on out of here. Next on the list is from Susan Speakman. Our friend Susan says, President Trump has kicked DACA, that's the DREAM Act, back to Congress to handle, thank goodness. But is there a humane and merciful way to deal with these dreamers? At this point, most are young adults who consider themselves Americans. Do we grant them citizenship, kick them out of the country, or something in between? Yeah, I think it's clearly something in between. I'm all about justice and fairness, and as much as possible, I like to see justice done. If you were brought to this country illegally as an infant, that wasn't your decision. You didn't make that decision. This is the only home you've ever known. The idea that somebody might grow up here and be thrown out is, I think, unjust. However, the fact remains that the reason that you're here is because people violated the laws of the United States. And if we reward that, then we're going to get more of it. Whatever we subsidize, we get more of. So if we're going to reward illegal immigration by granting people citizenship, then I don't like that either. So what's the answer? The best answer I can come up with is to say to these people, I mentioned this before, I don't remember where. Maybe it was on the show last week. I genuinely don't remember. But basically what I would suggest is you have a year now to make a decision. And the decision is, do you want to stay here and become an American citizen, yes or no? If the answer is yes, then you don't just suddenly get citizenship. You then go to the back of the line and you can apply for U.S. citizenship, and you have to go through all the steps and the provisional green card, and you have to wait 2 years, then you have to take the citizenship test the way Natasha's doing all of these things. It costs a lot of money, takes a lot of time, and you don't get to cheat and cut in line because that's rewarding the criminality of the original act. But it does mean you don't have to leave, and you do get to stay, and you just have to commit to becoming an American in your heart. And to those of them that already are, I feel for them. I think they deserve a path to this. So this is the most fair thing that I can do, that I can see as an answer. The question, if the answer is no, by the way, then the answer is, well, pick a country that you like. And you can go back there, and if you want to come here and work or come here and study, you're welcome to apply for a study visa. You're welcome to apply for a work visa, just like everybody else in the world. So that's it. What's it going to be? You're either in or out. We're not going to lower the standards in order to let you in. We're not going to just drop all of this stuff and spit in the face of all of these people that have been waiting for years and years and years and years and spent thousands of dollars so they could become Americans. What possibly could be worse than us saying to those people, yeah, you did it the right way, and we know you spent 6 years and $7,000 just so that you could get the the provisional green card. But if you'd been smart enough to come in from Mexico, well, you could have just had it overnight. Just walk up here and we'll just give it to you. That's not just either. So that's the best I can come up with, and it seems reasonably fair to me. If you want to stay on a guest worker's card, if you can get one the way that other people get a guest worker permit, that's great. If not, then no. You go back to the place where your parents were from. But I don't think you have to be forced out. I think you have to decide which one of these do you want, and then how do we get you that without being unjustly kicking you out of the country, and at the same time, without being unjustly moving you to the front of the line. And T-Dog Lyles says, speaking of that, how's it going, Bill, with Natasha? It turns out that just about a week ago, she got her U.S. employment ID card. It's interesting to me that the federal government gave her a taxpayer ID number several months before they gave her the opportunity to work. It's kind of indicative of our society. We're going to give you a number that we can tax you on, and within the next 2 or 3 months, we'll give you the permission to work. But the main thing is we got to get the tax number in early. So now with that card, she's able to travel, which she wasn't before. She was in kind of limbo. And then coming up will be the interview with immigration. And then after that, she'll get her resident alien card, and that's the green card. And then she has to wait 2 years before she can apply for citizenship. And as soon as she does, as soon as she's able to, she's going to do it. And she's going to have a hell of a teacher, too, I don't mind telling you. I've got a very good feeling that she's going to do well on the citizenship test. All right, one more, I think. Somebody's question. I just want to see if I can get something people haven't done before. Sorry. I'll go with this one just because it's shorter. Skip Hansen writes, do you think that World War II could be won by the U.S. today? Will the millennials fight for things that they don't believe in at home today? And if we force the young to go and fight, I'm sorry, I'm probably butchering that. Then where will we get the people at home to support the troops? Where will we get the new Rosie the Riveter? 65 and 70-year-olds can only do so much. The biggest decision after 4 years of college young men have to make is today is which bathroom to use. Yeah, that's exactly right, Skip. That's really good. I may have to steal that, honestly. That's the toughest decision they have to make is which bathroom to use. They don't have to go out there and lie about their age so they can go out and get killed with the rest of their friends. In answer to your question about whether World War II could be fought today, I don't think it could be fought today. I don't think it could be started today, to be honest with you. This is why I'm not too worried about the increasing tensions with Russia. In the Cold War, I didn't think we'd survive the Cold War. I remember thinking very clearly when I was probably 10 or 11, 12, somewhere in there, 14. I thought, if we can make it out of the 70s and make it out of the 80s, we'll be okay, but I don't think we're going to. And Russia was this dark, backwards place filled with dark, backwards people. And since then, we've gotten to know them a little better. I certainly have, anyway. It's embarrassing to me that Moscow is so much cleaner and newer and prettier than Los Angeles, but Putin's decided to put money into the city, and that's what happens. So the reason I say I don't think a World War II could be started again would be, let's say we wanted to just back up the clock and we're going to say, okay, is it possible that we'd go to war with Germany and Japan and we'd send bombers over there, and whose factories would we be bombing? We'd be bombing our own factories. We'd go to war with China and drop bombs on the Apple factory. Who's getting hurt here? The economy of the world is so intertwined. That's a very strong tie to sever today. And another one is people have gotten to know each other through Facebook and documentary films and so on. I mean, people didn't understand anything. They didn't understand anything about animals. Nobody knew anything about the water. I remember when Jacques Cousteau came out with his show. it was people said, my God, look, there are fish, there are things under the water, it's brand new. And this is kind of an awakening that I think has been very, very good. People used to hunt whales for oil because they thought they were beasts. They were simply robots. They were big, fat flesh robots that did nothing but swim and eat and swim and eat and had no intellect or emotional life whatsoever. And as long as they were big, giant meat robots, you could go and kill as many as you want to, and there you go. But once you realize that these things have individual songs, that they have a song for each one of them individually, that the way they take care of their young, the communication, all once you see it in documentary film footage, you don't think of them as meat robots anymore, and the idea of killing them for oil is repugnant to you. And that kind of thing has been going on, I think, with the rest of the world. I thought about doing, and I might still do, a firewall, and I forgot, I had a pretty good title for it. I was going to call it Our Friend the H-Bomb. And I was basically just going to say, nuclear weapons have kept the peace for 75 years now. They've kept the peace to such a degree that existential wars, the kind of wars where you could literally lose your country, are inconceivable today. Inconceivable. And I think this is not as cynical as it sounds. I think the reason that nuclear weapons have kept the peace is because throughout history, old men have sent young men off to war to be killed. And in the age of nuclear weapons, it's the old men who are going to get killed. There is no front line in a nuclear war. You don't get to have an adventure and let the masses go running at machine gun nests on the bank of the Somme in order for the glory of the empire, or for the glory of the Kaiser, for that matter. If you decide you want to pick a fight with somebody who's got a nuclear weapon, then chances are pretty good that you're going to go up in flames. And if you don't, you're not going to like the world that you see when you come out of your bunker. So our friend the H-bomb has made large-scale war virtually inconceivable. It's never happened before. And I think that's really it. It's actually kept the peace, and we should be thankful for that. I understand they're horrible. I understand them. I understand them much better than most people, I would say. Certainly much better than people on the left. In fact, I'm fascinated by them, and I would say I have a very good knowledge of them and their yield and the history of them and how they're delivered and so on. But everybody talks about disarmament and how good disarmament would be, but if we were to disarm, we'd be at war all the time. People talk about how good the left talks about these primitive people, and why do we have to live in our warlike modern society? Why can't we be like primitive people and sit around the campfire and weave baskets and eat the food that's available right on the trees, and everybody shares equally? I have a couple answers to that. First of all, you can if you want to, but the fact that you don't is telling me something. If you want to go live in the Amazon and sit cross-legged in the forest, I'm sure they could find a way to overcome your initial ignorance and stupidity and feed you long enough for you to figure out how to hunt and do all the other things and trap and fish and whatever and gather. And you can go and live an authentic life just like an absolute savage in the jungles of the Amazon. And I use the word savage and jungles because they're good words. The reason I say that they're savages is because when you actually get down to the brass tacks of what actually happens rather than what you wish would happen, you find that primitive people are at war far more often, and in far deadlier conflicts than civilized people are. Far more. They're at war all the time. All the time. There's raids against other people for trophies, for women. I think the worst culture that's ever lived on the earth was the Aztec culture, and these civilization raided, the entire hemisphere in order to sacrifice victims. I have an understanding. I think the number is correct. I think they sacrificed, no joke now, on a very important holy day. They sacrificed 80,000 slaves, 80,000 captives in 4 days. That's well beyond Auschwitz working at full capacity. So, here we are in the world. I don't foresee a World War III. I'm trying to see if I can get my mind around a serious shooting war with China over the Straits of Taiwan, let's say. And I can see that conflict escalating. I can see it going nuclear. I can't quite get all the way to, well, there's the end of Beijing and Washington because of Taiwan. I think, and of course the problem with disarmament is, even if it was a good idea, and I suspect it's not, because it never has been, I suspect that it would be bad if one side disarmed and the other one didn't. This is why I think my favorite statement about philosophy of defense came from some American general, somebody in the Joint Chiefs. I don't remember who it was. Somebody will probably tell me. This, I want to say it was in the 90s. I think it was somewhere around there. They were talking about the peace dividend that Russia had fallen and disarmament and the nuclear freeze and all the rest of this stuff. And this guy captured exactly precisely how I feel in one sentence. That sentence is this. He said, "The day may come when the lion and the lamb do in fact lie together in peace, but if that day ever comes, we'd better damn sure be the lion." And I thought, yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. Why? Because the lion controls the destiny of both those partners. The lion and the lamb lying down together in peace is a wonderful idea. It genuinely is. I'm not just tossing that away. It's the way to go. It's the way to live. I've lived in peace my entire life. But it's the lion's decision. The lamb is dependent on the goodwill of the lion. And if the lion changes his mind, then that's just too damn bad for the lamb. So I think the lamb ought to ammo up, because I don't want my existence, my freedom, my family, or anything else in the hands of other people whose good intentions I'm required to trust. I just am not willing to do it. So I know that's a bit of a roundabout answer, Skip, but I don't know how else to answer it. I don't see a world where Russia and America, Russia and China, China and America are going to nuke each other with everything we've got. I can see a world where things get out of hand, but they haven't yet. Was it Curtis LeMay who said that, Wild Goose? Was it actually Curtis LeMay? Because if he did say that, my respect for him goes even higher. In any event, I don't know. I don't know. I have friends who are in the military, friends who were deeply involved with what was going on in Syria in real time. I might get a chance to ask them about whether or not brushing up against the Russians in Syria could have gotten really out of hand and really ugly if one of those aircraft had been shot down by accident or even intentionally or whatever. But they were able to deconflict it, and we always have been able to deconflict it since 1945. We've deconflicted the big fights and left everything to proxy wars, which we haven't had one of those in a long time either. Vietnam or Korea, it's America versus Russia, through the South Koreans versus the North Koreans, or the South Vietnamese versus the North Vietnamese. I do see Kim Jong-un being lunatic enough to launch a nuclear weapon at the U.S. because I think he is just bat guano crazy. And all of the people in his society, it's 70 years now, none of the people in Korea really, except for ancient people, have had any contact with reality at all. They think the entire world speaks Korean because it's the best language. And I don't see how Kim doesn't buy into that. It's one thing, I guess just to close it up, I want to say it was Martin Amis, Kingsley Amis's son, wrote a book about communism called Laughter in the 20 Million. And he made a point I thought was really, really superb. He was talking about how unprepared Russia was, the Soviet Union was, for the German invasion. And not just unprepared, but they'd just previously gutted their military with purges, and reports were coming in from everywhere about this massive buildup on the German side. German reconnaissance airplanes were flying over the Soviet Union. Many of them had to land because of mechanical problems, and the Soviets fixed the engines and gassed them up and sent them back. And Stalin told people, I think it was Beria, the night before the invasion, said, God bless, he didn't say God bless, he said, here's to Comrade Stalin, the Germans will never invade us in 1941. And then the next day it happened. But the point Amos was making, I thought was a really terrific point, was this, and this reflects back on the Kim issue. He said that he didn't think that Hitler would invade Russia because he didn't want Hitler to invade Russia. And that would be enough reason that it wouldn't happen. Because over the course of 20 years, prior to that invasion, anything that Stalin wanted came true. If he wanted somebody dead, they died. If he wanted a hydroelectric dam built in the North Pole, it happened. And he became so conditioned to having his will become law that he simply had lost touch with reality. And that Amos bolsters his case, and many other writers have bolstered their case by looking at what happened to Stalin when the invasion actually did come. He basically fell apart. He was there for a day or two immediately upon the invasion, and after a very short time, less than 48 hours, he suddenly just didn't come in to the Kremlin, didn't come into work, didn't show up for almost a week. He was at home curled up in a ball, and after something like a week of no leader, with the Germans pushing in unbelievably deep, something like 95% of or 98% of the Russian Air Force destroyed by the Germans in the first 2 days, some incredible number. So Stalin retreated to his little dacha and had essentially a breakdown. And when the leaders, when Molotov and Beria and I guess it might have been Khrushchev at that point, a couple of others, went out to the dacha and walked in on Stalin. Stalin looked up and said, "Why are you here?" And it's clear to everybody that Stalin thought he was going to be arrested and shot because he committed the biggest military blunder in history. I mean, it's just the most appalling failure in history, the unpreparedness of the Russians and what it cost them. But they said, "Hey, Joe, we want you to come back, Koba, and want you to take over the war." And he did, and he spent a year overconfident, and then he started to listen to his generals like Zhukov, and next thing you know, there they go. But my point here is this. Stalin believed that Hitler wouldn't invade because Stalin didn't want it to be so. And that week of him having a nervous breakdown was the amount of time it took for him to reconnect to the fact that reality was independent of his wishes. It took him that long, and it took something of that magnitude too, by the way, something that catastrophic, for him to be shocked back into the reality that the world is not the way he wants it to be just because he wants it to be that way. And I suspect that kind of thing goes on with Kim and is much, much worse. I think when people are telling you that you're basically a living god and that North Korea is the best country in the world and that our people are the most powerful and we defeated America and we chased them out and so on and so on and so on, and now we have nuclear weapons and we're unstoppable. I don't think it's unreasonable to assume that somebody could be that unreasonable. And this is, just since we're talking about the war on this last question, this is a possibility, I think. I think a possibility of a North Korea nuclear strike is real only because they're that insane. And this brings me back to the final thought of this whole thing, which is, like we're talking about before about disarmament. This kind of scenario is precisely what all of Reagan's initial anti-missile defenses actually could handle. Reagan knew that there was no way that they could stop 25,000 incoming warheads at the same time. He understood that. He was playing to bankrupt the Soviets, and it worked. But we have got some very, very capable anti-missile systems. And Barack Obama pulled a bunch of them out, and certainly if he didn't stop the development on them, he certainly didn't boost it any. But even several years ago, I talked to a guy who was had worked on guidance previously for one of these big defense contractors, was working on guidance on, and I said, "Is it really true we can hit these warheads?" And he said to me, "We can hit whichever part of the warhead you want us to hit." That's tall talk, but they do it. They shoot a bullet down with another bullet. And progressives will say, well, that's only got a 60% success rate or a 20% success rate. And my reply to that is, well, then let's launch 200 of them. Why don't we? You try and flip a coin 200 times in a row and have it come up heads every time. And there was the airborne laser that would shoot them in the boost phase, and we've still got a fair amount of it. You've got the Aegis destroyers that carry an upgraded Standard 3 missile that can hit them in the mid phase while they're outside the atmosphere before they come in. We used to have airborne lasers that could take them out on the launch phase and put the wreckage right back over where it left. That would be nice. I suspect we have. I know we have things like upgraded Patriots and the THAAD defense, the theater high altitude anti-missile defense or anti-aircraft defense, something like that, THAAD. So we've got a lot of means of stopping this. I also have a great deal of confidence in our intelligence service. I believe that Donald Trump, if intelligence was convinced that he's going to launch this against the U.S., Guam, or Japan, and this isn't just a test, we have inside information that this one's for real, then I have no doubt that Trump would destroy it on the pad. And when they were talking about launching from submarines, which cuts the response time way down from a leisurely 15 minutes to a rather terse 4 minutes, I thought, man, that North Korean submarine. And then the second I thought of it, I thought, Bill, you've been on board a U.S. nuclear attack sub, an old one, and there's no way that submarine is ever going to launch that missile. It's just simply not going to happen. I assure you that that Korean missile launching submarine is noisy enough for them to be able to hear it leave port in North Korea and hear it in San Diego. I assure you. And if you think that ballistic sub can get out there without having 2 or 3 American Los Angeles class or Sea Wolf class or Virginia class submarines a couple thousand yards astern in the baffles, you got another thing coming. And by the way, these submarines don't just go sailing through the water and all of a sudden push the button and off they go. They're going to launch. This is true for our boomers as well. They're going to launch. The sub has to stop, and then it has to come up to launch depth, and that's a very precise depth. And then they have to open the outer doors, and that makes noise and all the rest of it. There's no way they're going to get that shot off in a submarine. So that would be great. I mean, the best solution to this would be to have incontrovertible evidence that they were about to launch, and we simply nipped it in the bud, Andy. The missile never got out of the silo, and that submarine's at the bottom of the ocean, and so is the crew. And if you've got any more nuclear submarines, Kim, we got more torpedoes where those came from. Or you put a cruise missile strike in on the pad if they're going to launch from land and you're convinced that this is the one. And I don't think you have to be entirely convinced. I think you have to have a pretty good likelihood. If somebody's holding a gun to your head and threatening to kill you, then Han's allowed to shoot first in a case like that. So I suspect if they think it was a real one, they would then be a pretty simple thing, really, I imagine, for a submarine-launched cruise missile attack on the launch pad. People don't realize how, well, I guess some people do, how fragile a missile is. And anybody who's ever watched the footage of a rocket going up and then coming down and exploding, I mean, you've got this enormous energy, enormous amounts of energy in the propellant and the oxidant. And the Atlas rocket that launched the Mercury orbital capsules, John Glenn rode an Atlas into space. It looks like it's made out of solid steel. It's a real tough-looking rocket, but the skin on an Atlas rocket is thinner than a dime. So they don't have what we've got or what the Russians have. They don't have hardened silos that can just simply slide open and pop off they go. They got to crate this thing out to this launch pad and crank it up to the vertical, and they got to fuel it and all the rest of it. And these things take time. And I am very, very confident of our ability to see these things and to know what's going on. And in this case, I think we have a president who, given enough convincing evidence, would say, okay, you pointed a gun at her head. You're telling us you're going to kill us. You've just cocked the weapon. That's it. That's it. That's all the risk we're going to take. Anyway, that'll do it, I think, for this episode. What is this? 164. I just put 163 up yesterday. Sometimes it takes a while. I'll try and put up 164 right now onto YouTube. But as always, thanks again for coming out, and thanks for your support for the members out there. And I think I'm out of town next Wednesday. Pretty sure I am, but I'll let you know. If I am, I'll be back the following Wednesday, and we'll have more stories to tell. So thanks for being with us. Especially thanks for all the people who watch this live and make it so much fun watching the comment section. And I think that'll do it for episode 164. So until next time, everybody, be careful out there. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you soon.